today on Real Nurse Stories, I have the pleasure of interviewing Jenn Johnson, who is a nurse and an author. And Jenn has written a book that's a topic that's very close to my heart, and the title of the book is Nursing Intuition. So we're going to talk some more. But first of all, I'd like just to welcome Jenn to my podcast, Real Nurse Stories. So welcome, Jenn.
Thank you so much for having me, Eva. Been looking forward to this for a while.
Yeah, that's good. Me too. Me too. So I'd like to start, Jenn, if it's all right with you, right at the beginning. And if you just share perhaps with the listeners a little bit about your journey into nursing, how you became a nurse, and then we'll go from there, if that's okay.
Absolutely. So many people have stories about, I grew up wanting to be a nurse. My mother was a nurse, or my aunt was a nurse, all these things. I fell face first into nursing.
Mhm.
Nursing found me. I did not find it. I ended up going to university for a biology degree. I got through a year, wasn't really thrilled with where it was going. It was Lakehead University, which is actually a very large forestry school in Northern Ontario. And so a lot of the biology was plant-based. I'm going, well, it's not really what I want to do, but I'm going
No.
to continue to go with it. And second year, I ended up failing my first half of organic chemistry, which I'd never failed anything before. It really gave me pause because now I'm a full year behind if I want to continue on. And so I'm thinking and I'm like looking at things. I'm like, this is not really what I want to do. I don't think I want to continue on. And thankfully, I had a buddy in first year who was in our residence with us, and she was in first year nursing. So we would pour over her textbooks and all the pictures and the stories. And you're like, okay, this is interesting. This is super cool. This is what I want to do. So
Uh-huh.
thankfully was able to swap into the 3-year compressed program. So it was able to do it at a 4-year pace because I already had about a year and a half worth of credits. And it's been like a love story with it ever since. I ended up meeting my husband about a year prior to me graduating, and where he was working, he was a paramedic supervisor. The little town where he was, less than 5,000 people. The Canadian government decided that because it was deemed underserviced, for every year that I worked full-time hours, I was able to get a year's tuition back. So I'm like,
Oh,
wow, this
gosh.
is what a win-win. This is all set up for me. And I was already gonna go there, and now I get the money on
Yeah.
top of it. I'm like, this is fantastic. Not realizing that there was a reason why it was underserviced. The bullying was absolutely inhumane. It was a very hard 5 years there. And so they only had a very small hospital. So there was one nurse for the ER, one registered nurse with two registered practical nurses for the floor. And the floor was maybe 14 beds, and truly was mainly just somewhere for those who couldn't get into long-term care or extended care. They were just kind of waiting and just kind of hanging out. So it wasn't
Mhm.
really a true functioning hospital per se, but any emergencies that came in usually got flown out. And that was my introduction to emergency nursing. It was
Yeah.
something that I never thought about, but looking back now, there was a reason why I fell into it, and the love of emergency nursing. And I'm continuing to be at the
Yeah.
bedside within the emergency. It's been one of those things where, everything happens for a reason, and I fell on my face for a reason. And I've been very thankful for, as hard as that opportunity was in the very beginning, it's really kind of let me know that that's not the nurse I want to be. I don't want to eat
No.
my young. I want to support us as we move forward.
Yeah.
It's been a great starting ground. We moved down to Southern Ontario, and I've worked everywhere from a pediatric emergency to a stroke center to a trauma center, and now to kind of a mid-ground kind of ER. And it's been a tough go at some points, but
Yeah.
for the most part it's been absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny, isn't it, how quite a lot of the nurses I've interviewed about their careers for my podcast haven't always started off with, nursing as their intention. And quite a lot of them
Yeah.
started doing a science degree or something completely different and then pivoted and ended up in nursing. So I find that fascinating. And I think the other thing I really like about your description is it's almost that, when you talk about your first role and the culture, and it's almost like a memo to self, isn't it? This
Oh,
is not how I want to be.
not at all. I used to describe, going to work as, and it was like maybe a 5-minute drive, if that, to
Mm,
work. And, I'd play my ER pump up playlist of my favorite songs to remind me of who I was before this whole
mm,
scenario, to remind me that no, I am strong, I am capable, I know what I'm doing.
yeah,
It's just you're stuck in a really crappy situation. So,
yeah,
we just got to get through this 12 hours and, do what we got to do. But it was hard. It was
yeah,
5 years of absolute hell. But, when I left and kind of demanded my exit interview because I'm pretty sure they weren't going to give me one,
yeah,
it was such a small hospital that you'd pass by the CEO's office every time you went down from the floor to the ER. And we knew the CEO, he was a good friend of my husband. So I'm like, listen, I need this exit interview. I need you to know what's going on.
yeah,
And I think I chewed this guy's ear off for like easily an hour before he had to like step out. And then he's like, I just want to continue to let you, do what you're
yeah,
doing. And so he brought in, I'm sure, some intern of some sort who this other poor guy's now got to listen to me for an extra half an hour, just vent and let 5 years of steam off because I was just so unimpressed with the experience. And, did it have any effect? I'm sure it didn't, but it at least let me know that, somebody heard. I didn't leave without saying a
yeah,
word. I didn't leave, not saying my piece. I absolutely said my piece.
yeah.
So off we go to the next adventure. And just kind of this is now in the background.
Mm. That's very interesting. It's a similar experience I had around wanting, my experience to be heard. And it was almost like it needed to be said, but it was also closure because there was a real strong sense of I didn't want to leave that hanging. So I really relate to that. I think,
Yeah.
when we know that something's right and we feel that, that there is this real push to say that to somebody, even if you know that that may not change anything, at least it's been said.
Yeah. I kind of was like, I knew very, very much so that it wouldn't change anything because
Yeah.
I had said something years prior. And every time I'd kind of brought it up or said something about her behavior, oh, well, that's just her. Like,
Mm,
that is not an answer. Like, it's
no,
completely
no.
unacceptable. But the fact that I kept hearing it and kept
Yeah.
hearing it, I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, it's not me. I can rest assured that I'm not going crazy. This
No,
isn't me.
no.
This is her and her behavior. And I just kind of have to be aware. We kind of, the ongoing joke was that, a few of us sat down one night and we think she had chased out like at least 10 to 15
Yeah.
registered nurses out of this town of 5,000
Yeah.
in a time span of like 10 to 15 years. And
Yeah.
you're like, well, no wonder the area is deemed an underserviced area. They can't keep nurses to save their
No.
lives. And you wonder why.
Yeah. And it comes back to that whole, I talk about this a lot, having difficult conversations is still something that's sidestepped. It's almost like everybody knows that a particular person behaves in a certain way and the effect of that, but no one's willing to actually sit that person down and say, this isn't on, it's not the way to be. It's kind of like we excuse it, well, that's just the way it is. Well, it shouldn't be the way it is because for all the reasons you've really highlighted there, we lose people, or people don't want to work there, or people work there and have a horrible time. It's something that's not just peculiar to nursing in one particular area. I think if you were to look at this globally, it happens everywhere. It really does.
And so I just actually gone to this gigantic conference in Las Vegas, and the person who was sponsoring me was from the UK. So we were
Yeah,
kind of going back and forth about all the struggles that the NHS was having, and how can we come at this from a kind of a different angle to try and help things out. And at least like the culture is slowly changing, but it's
yes,
not fast enough. And it's not
no,
until these people retire, unfortunately,
yeah,
that this kind of behavior stops, but it's already left an impact with those who've been around it for 20
Yeah.
plus years. So it's
Yeah.
the ever slowly changing that no, this is absolutely not acceptable.
Yeah.
We got to put our feet down and go from
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. So tell me, Jen, I'm curious to know kind of about your book and how you came to be interested in the whole intuition. We kind of touched a little bit, but I'd really like to understand kind of what drove you to writing a book about intuition.
Yeah. So kind of the short answer was COVID. You
That's
know, burning out so hard with COVID. And so
yeah,
here in Ontario, we had a lot of services come forward and say, "Hey, we're looking forward to helping our frontline staff and nurses and all the essential workers kind of thing." But there was a group of attorneys that had actually come forward to say, "Hey, we really want to do all the nurses' wills for free."
yeah,
And so, you were already freaked out and not knowing what was going to happen, and the whole world is shutting down, and everything's changing from day to afternoon to night. Like policies are changing left, right, and center. And now you've got these attorneys very kindly offering to do our wills for free. And I'm sure it was out of the goodness of their hearts and they had the best of intentions, but the take home message for us was we were expected to die.
yeah,
That was
yeah,
that was what kind of hit us. And so kind of having that in the back of your mind and dealing with the waves of the pandemic and going through it. And I had a 4 and 5 year old at the time, so we had no daycare
yeah,
for at least 3 months, and I was working full time, and my husband was also
yeah,
essential. I would work all night, I'd stay up all day. Maybe I'd get a nap when
yeah,
my husband got home for a little bit before going back into nights. Maybe I'd get a 1.5 to 2 hour nap if I was lucky at work, and then come back. And it was just these little teeny tiny short snippets of naps. And it left me completely burnt and out of my mind. I probably shouldn't have been nursing, to be fair.
mm,
And it wasn't until I kind of got to a point where I kind of snapped and I said, you know what? I can't do this anymore. I'm going to go to recovery room, because that way I've got a little bit more flexibility with my hours, and I can get a little bit more sleep, and I can know if people are COVID positive or not coming into the recovery room. Like there's that whole piece of not knowing taken away, because everybody that
yeah,
came through to get surgery, we knew exactly if they were COVID positive or negative. And so I said I have to step away for a bit. So stepping away, getting the free therapy that was
mm,
offered, getting on antidepressants for the first time in my life was hugely helpful, but was a hard to kind of come to terms with
yeah.
of I'm strong, I'm fine, but no, I'm not. And so it got to the
Well,
point of, well, if I were to die, how do you then let the 4 and 5 year old know that mom chose to go to work? Like I
mm,
chose to continue to go in and expose myself potentially and expose them potentially. So I started to write down a lot of my good stories, all the times that I'd helped or advocated or, did something that, ended up saving the patient. And of course, with those stories, then very quickly came all the huge amounts of trauma that I had not dealt with for
yeah,
16
yeah,
plus years.
yeah,
And so writing those stories down and getting them out was hugely cathartic. But then looking back at them, I'm going like there's something through all this.
yeah,
And I was listening to, so Llewellyn is a publisher out of the United States, which is kind of more a little bit more metaphysical
mm,
base than most. And they were having online book chats. And the one book chat was about this woman who'd written this book, Intuition at Work. And it
yeah,
just like hit me like a bolt of lightning, like intuition at work. I'm like, I use my intuition all the time at work. And it was just that
yeah,
thought that I'm
yeah,
like, so I went back and looked through all my stories. I'm like, sure enough, here's this little thread weaving all its way through. And that's that's it. That's the theme. That's the takeaway. Holy cow. And so, doing some investigation into intuition and trying to wrap my head around it and going, well, I would love to bring this book forward, but unless I have scientific evidence to really, really, really back me up, like it's already a woo topic. We
yeah,
already joke about it at
yeah,
3 a.m. I
yeah,
can't bring it forward unless there's science behind me. So went on a huge deep dive into the science of it all. So insight versus intuition and psychology versus physiology and neurons and this, that, and the other.
yeah,
And shockingly enough, not only is there a ton of information on intuition, but specifically intuition in nursing. There are so many studies about
yeah,
intuition and nursing.
yeah,
And so I'm going, oh my God, that's it. Like, so it's science. So if it's now backed by science, peer-reviewed, medical-based evidence, science, we can teach it. We can talk about it. We can bring it
Yeah.
out of that deep, dark
Yeah.
conversation where it's only experienced nurses who kind of jokingly talk about that sixth sense,
Yeah.
and start teaching it to the young ones, start teaching it to those coming in, to say it is just like a skill like any other. It takes time to hone, it takes practice, and you're going to get it wrong. That's okay. We all get it
Mm.
wrong, but the science still says even if you get it wrong and you do advocate for your patient and the doctor comes to see your patient who you think something's going on, the science says even that doctor coming and seeing and giving that patient another touch still improves patient outcomes.
Yeah.
So
Well, we know.
how can you fight that kind of
Yeah.
science that says like even if you're wrong, you're still right, that patient's
Yeah.
still going to improve just based on you
Yeah.
advocating and bringing the doc in.
Yeah. There's a lot
And
of research around in terms of critical incidents, that touch
yes,
point that you've just mentioned there, where a nurse uses that. I'm not sure what exactly is going on, but I know this person needs to be reviewed urgently. And that
yes,
step in itself, the evidence supports the fact that in terms of patient outcomes, those points make a massive difference. And I
yeah,
find that fascinating. It's like what I find fascinating most is that we feel we have to pursue the scientific basis to support something that we all know and we all use to make it credible, because if you go back, way back into nursing, nursing has its roots in, healing and spirituality.
yeah,
And it's like we were talking about this before we started the episode today. It's like we don't talk about it anymore. It's got pushed in a box and locked away because, here we are, a technical, rational, professional, scientific profession, and that doesn't fit with that intended image. And yet
yeah.
it's such an important fundamental part of nursing that, I feel really strongly that if we don't talk about this and we don't write about it, then that question comes up, well, what is it that nurses do that somebody else can't do? And I would hate to see that day in nursing
Yeah.
for all the reasons that you've articulated so well.
Thank you. So again, going to this health conference, and a major push was a lot of AI and healthcare and all these things and virtual nursing and all these things. And I'm like, I'm all for it to let people have access to healthcare who wouldn't have access any other way. But we're stepping back. We're stepping back from the bedside, and truly like are the art and the science where they both come together is at the bedside. And
Yeah.
people ask me, they're like, "Oh, are you going to leave? You're going to sell 1 million books and you're going to leave the bedside?" I'm like, "No." Like I could see dropping, so I'm part-time currently. I could see
Uh-huh.
living the part-time life. I could see, the per diem or the casual nurse, but I can't walk away. Like it's become so ingrained. I'm trying not to let it be my identity because that's a whole other issue. But the the satisfaction from
Yeah.
taking someone from really, really sick or damn near dead or dead to heartbeat, to feeling
Yeah.
better, to seeing them in a couple of days and they're leaving the hospital and they're doing so much better, or just being able to intervene and provide comfort for a family who's not sure whether or not they should be, you know, changing or following their family's wishes for palliative care, and they're torn because they feel like they
Mm.
should be saying to do everything, but their family's wishes were to not do anything.
Yeah.
And here I can come in the middle to say, hey, if this was my mother, if this was my grandmother, this is what I would be doing as the ER nurse, seeing what I've seen and knowing what I know. This is the
Yeah.
angle that I would come at it from. And a lot of these people just need a little bit of support and someone else to say, it's okay to say
Yeah.
stop. It is
Yes.
absolutely okay. And
Yeah.
we can switch gears, and palliative care does not mean do not treat. We're still managing pain. And if there's a
Mm.
urinary tract infection or infection that just needs to be treated, we can do
Mm.
that still. But we're providing care and we're providing comfort. And nursing school did not teach that. Nursing school
No.
is you're going to heal everybody, everybody's going to be great, not really preparing us for nursing is hard, and it's hard physically, it's hard emotionally, it's hard
Yeah.
spiritually. coming to terms and coming face to face with death more often than not, we're not taught that. So being able
No.
to then pick up those skills about how to talk to people about death
Yeah.
and how to let people express things while still being within a safe space, but then being respectful of us. Walking that tightrope is a very hard skill to learn. It's taken me at least 10 years to figure out
Mm.
how to talk to people and how to reach people at their level and to a way that they can understand. But it's something that I use absolutely every single
Mm.
day. So I'm coming at all of this as to let's support those coming out of school and let's help them transition from school to the bedside, but then let's also help them in all those soft skills that maybe at this very moment in time be a little bit hard to explain with science, but the science
Mm.
is always coming. The science is always changing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
why not lean into the art of nursing a little bit
Yeah.
more than the science? Not to say that we're going to forget the
Yeah.
science because it's a very, very crucial part,
Yeah.
but it needs to be a 50-50, the holistic nursing model, whole care, the whole person.
Yeah.
That's where we need to remember that that's our apex. That is where we are most powerful.
And that's so true. I talk about the essence of nursing, which is a lot of what you've described there. And it's that knowing that comes with experience and time that, you see that in nursing, those nurses who worked in an area have all that knowledge and they just intuitively know what to do and what to
Yeah.
say. My experience in COVID, different scenario, but working in a vaccination clinic, mass vaccination, and we had a lot of graduate nurses who it was their first placement post qualifying. One of the things that they struggled with was how to have a conversation with someone who was really quite challenging, as you can imagine, around all sorts of issues to do with
Oh, I can
vaccination.
imagine.
I would take them with me and they would say, how do you learn to do that? How do you learn to de-escalate a situation so that somebody feels heard? And I think for nurses who are going through training, this is such an important part of their knowledge and learning and understanding that it's something you acquire over time, but you can learn to do it by observing and working with people who do that really well. So it's kind of like you extend your reach when you're good at that by sharing your knowledge. And that's the sense really when you're talking about, still being connected to the workplace, you're doing that. You're sharing that wisdom, that intuitive knowing. There's lots of different words that are used to describe that, but essentially, that's the part of nursing to me that is such an important part and has such it's almost like I want to say it's like a decoding role, isn't it? It's like we get all this medical information thrown at
Mm-hmm.
us, and a nurse is the one that helps that person to navigate or that family to navigate, make sense, and make a decision based on that honest, straightforward conversation that's a human conversation.
Yeah.
It's such an important skill to have. One of the things I want to ask you, Jenn, is do you actively teach young nurses those skills? Do you have a role within where you are?
Not in a formal sense,
No.
but absolutely I'm charge nurse sometimes. So, I'm kind of flitting around, kind of, are you okay? Do you need anything? Or is there anybody
Yeah.
that you're worried about? Early conversations, especially early on in the shift, to be like, hey, you've just gotten a report. Is there anything that's kind of like popping up in your head that you're not really sure about? Or,
Mm.
you have somebody that you're like, I think I should keep an extra hard eye on them. Let me know so that I can also help keep an eye out for them. Things like behaviors or challenging family members,
Mm.
like give me a heads up so I can kind of be present, because a lot of these nurses, it's the fawn response, right? Where they just kind of shut down and they think that they're supposed to just take it, when in reality that is absolutely not the case.
No.
So feel free to bring me in and I will very kindly redirect some people and their behaviors to as to what's appropriate in a hospital
Mm.
setting kind of thing. And not to say that I'm exceedingly blunt with them, because usually those people do not do well with that response. It's
No.
more a lot of apologies. It's a very Canadian thing to do, where we just say we're sorry a
Yeah.
lot. You can say that while being empathetic. And I know I'm not saying sorry for me, I'm saying
Mm.
sorry for the situation,
Mm.
because a lot of the times your loved one's stuck in a stretcher out in the hallway under bright lights. They're
Mm.
already frail and potentially have a dementia diagnosis or an Alzheimer's diagnosis. And now they're escalating because they're confused and they're not in their normal situation.
Mm.
Plus, they maybe, have a disease process that's worsening things. And, the family is getting upset and they're getting worked up because they see that their loved one is also getting worked up. So it's just that energy that kind of,
Yeah.
they escalate. And so it's up to me to kind of come in to be like, okay, what are we doing?
Mm.
Let me hear you out. I'm very, very sorry that your loved one's stuck in the hallway. Unfortunately, we do not have any beds on the floor. We do not have any other beds in emergency. We're waiting for things to kind of cool down a little bit, and for some of the people in the emergency to go, so that maybe we can move them into a bedroom within one of these ward rooms, to be able to let them rest, because we do put a very high price on sleeping and being
Mm.
comfortable in the emerge. So, let us try and do our best with the limited resources we have,
Yeah.
make the right adjustments. So sometimes I call it like playing people Tetris, because you're trying to get people into the right spots
Yeah. Yeah.
while being respectful and being aware of what's going on, and their medical needs as well as their physical
Mm.
needs, and trying to do the best that you can. And unfortunately, sometimes the people who are the walkie-talkies, you're stuck out in the hall because you're able to walk
Yeah.
to the bathroom by yourself, and you're cognitively aware enough to be able to make that decision yourself.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
unfortunately, you're not sick enough to be into the other rooms. However, we'll try and give you a couple of masks to cover up your eyes, and we can turn down the lights a little bit in the hallway. But it's just remembering to do those little things that we, as a straight night shift nurse currently right
Yeah.
now, that's my main focus, is like, let's get the lights off as soon as we can. Let's try
Yeah.
and get people settled, because we never know what's going to roll in at any moment. And so if somebody can get a few hours of rest before some trauma comes in and we have to deal with that, and the lights are all on and we're loud and there's extra people flying around the
Mm.
department, let's try and facilitate that before, because again, we never know what's going to come in.
Yeah.
And that's just what the rules that we live by, is
Yeah.
try and get
Yeah.
everybody settled as soon as possible, because you never know what's going to come
Yeah.
in.
And that's so hard, isn't it? Because, we're in the business of helping people, healing people, and yet the environments we work in don't facilitate
Oh,
that very often
they're
at
so
all. And, it takes a lot of effort to remember those things. And I think more so in modern healthcare times, because there's so many pressures. There's, aging population, not enough staff, not enough room, not enough resources. And that's
yeah.
increasingly difficult to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious also, Jen, to just explore with you a little bit about, because I know that you also talk about the link between intuition and burnout. And I
Mhm.
just want to explore that a little bit more in terms of, what your thoughts are around that.
Yeah. Probably the easiest way to put it is, if so we're going about our day as a nurse, we have that ping or that feeling or that, just that sense that something's wrong. And, we decide at one point, we don't have the time to deal with it, we don't have the energy to deal with it, or we're not sure about it and we put it off. What then happens if something happens to that patient, and they crash or they code or they end up dying? All of a sudden, that falls back on the nurse, right? Then you're thinking, well, did I talk soon enough? Did I bring it up? Should I have brought it up? It's all these questions that fly around, that then there's that guilt factor that lands on us. And so ignoring your intuition could potentially then lead to very critical scenarios that then put the guilt and the heaviness and the weight of nursing back on the individual nurse. So
Mhm.
thinking about not actively seeking help when we thought or had a flitting idea that maybe we should have. For a new
Mm.
nurse, that weight is insane. And I've been
Huge.
there. I was a year out and I had a patient who was admitted for pancreatitis and everything was fine, kind of
Mm.
in and out very frequently for an alcohol related pancreatitis. And first thing in the morning doing my vitals, and he kind of doubles over in pain and it freaks me out. And I'm going, okay, well, what's going on? And so I call my doc and say, hey, like, this is what's happened. And I get put off
Mm.
and continue to watch this guy, and his vitals just trend all the wrong ways. And by, I think, 11:30 in the morning, we're moving him to our one cardiac room.
Yeah.
And, within an hour, we're starting compressions because his heart has stopped. And by like 2 o'clock, we're done and he's gone
Mm.
and he's died. And you're going, my God, like, did I advocate hard enough? Because I know that I called the doctor at least two or
Mm.
three times and she kept putting me off. But could I have said something different? Was I missing something? Was there a different way I could have advocated that maybe the doctor would have listened a bit more? And it took a long time to come to terms with what happened, and did I play a part in either not recognizing it fast enough or not advocating hard
Mm.
enough. And it wasn't until I left that job 5 years later that that doctor kind of took me aside and say, hey, like, don't let them tell you that you don't know what you're doing. And I knew
Mm.
exactly what she was talking about. And she walked off, and I'm going, I got so mad because I'm like, I have been doing this for 5 years now with you guys, and had I not left, would you have even said anything? And do you understand how important that validation would have been when it happened? Like, I
Mm.
had to cope at that point with trying to realize what had happened and come to terms with it. And that was my
Mm.
first patient death where I was the primary nurse. That was my
Mm.
patient. And
Mm.
that all happened. And so to have all that doubt about, did I do enough? Did I miss something? What happened? It took a long time to get over. And not only just like getting over and then being able to still work in that facility and feeling comfortable enough with that doctor, it was then, having that guilt and that worry worsen the bullying that was already happening. So
Mm.
I spiraled, and I spiraled hard
Mm.
about, am I doing the right thing? Am I learning fast enough? Is this the right thing for me? Am I totally off my rocker? Should I leave? This is like 14, 15, 16 years ago when
Yeah.
burnout wasn't a topic. It wasn't something that we were thinking about or even speaking about. But yet here I was completely doubting myself based on one scenario with a patient and having that then compounded. So to then move down south after 5 years, have that validation
Yeah.
finally to go, okay, like, I do know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And then to
Yeah.
then feel like I could lean into it harder and advocate and find my voice, like, that changed everything.
Mm.
So truly the link between, potentially not just realizing that you're having those intuitive hits and those moments where you're like, I think there's more going on. There's also the portion of like, do you act on it or do you not?
Mm.
And the potential ethical and moral burnout from not acting on your intuition is potentially harming you in the long run if, heaven forbid, something happens and you're there to witness it.
Mm. There's two things there that strike me that, are really important there. It's like the second guessing. So we know intuitively, but there's an element of second guessing because we're maybe not experienced enough or feel confident enough, and we squash that intuition. And then there's also, for me, a missing link in terms of around supervision, clinical supervision in the real sense that we need to provide opportunities that create a safe space for staff to talk through exactly those
Yeah.
instances where we carry those questions. Is there something I could have done differently? Is there something I missed? Because we don't have great ways of doing that. We have formal debrief for,
Mhm.
situations where there's like a disaster situation or something that happens on a large scale. But these
Mhm.
incidents that occur between a nurse and a patient, there is to me a lack of a mechanism there. And I know from colleagues that I have in the UK in the NHS, that's one thing that they do really well is that whole clinical supervision. And they do that in multidisciplinary groups that are trained. So the supervisor is trained, you belong with that group, and you can take anything and have that discussion. And it's such a valuable mechanism. But again, there's not here in Australia, there's limited clinical supervision for nurses. Yet if you work in one of the other health professions like psychology, it's a requirement for registration. And I find that fascinating that when you look at the size of the nursing workforce, it's the largest workforce in health, no matter where in the world you work. And yet we don't have access to something that's actually really crucial in dealing with that whole, have I done the right thing question. And that makes the difference between somebody internalizing that and leading to burnout or not. And we, like we hear about burnout all the time. We hear about resilience. People get switched off when you talk about those things. It's like, oh, here we go again. Nurses have to be resilient, but what does that mean? And what does it look like? And what are healthcare organizations doing to support some of these things that aren't tokenistic but are actually meaningful? That's
I would love. So I've actually taken back to my own health system. So when I wrote the book, I said, hey, like truly, so we've got RACE teams, so rapid access to critical events teams. So usually it's based out of the ICU. There's one or two ICU nurses, or no, one ICU nurse, one respiratory therapist, and then an ICU physician. So if a nurse in the hospital, or even a family member, they advertise to family members as well to say, hey, if you think something's off, if you think something wrong, you're just not sure, call up RACE. We can come, we can assess the patient, and we can go from there. And the hope is, again, to then avoid critical events and catch things much earlier, sepsis and deliriums and all these things so much earlier. Especially for patients who are on the med surge floors and your ratios are insane, like 6-1, 8-1, and the nurses don't have maybe the critical care background to understand what's going on or have access to an educator who would then kind of support them in learning more. And so my pitch was like, I need somebody to be on that RACE team who will then go to the primary nurse and take the primary nurse aside and say, look what they're doing. This is what they're doing. This is what you did well. This is, so maybe for next time, maybe we call a few hours earlier. Maybe next time you just increase how often you're doing vitals, or maybe you can watch out for this symptom or that symptom. Somebody to then support the primary nurse in learning. Because really, if that then primary nurse can go, oh, fantastic, that's what I can look for. That's what I can absorb. And it's in the moment, it's your own patient, it's your own experiences, and it is so much more relatable than just some scenario that somebody else has come up with. This is your patient. You are invested. You want things to go well, not just for them, but also for you, because you don't want to feel awful like you've missed something. How about having a senior nurse then come with, and the ICU has got the patient, fantastic, but here's this nurse to come help this primary nurse on the floor and not only figure out what's gone on with her patients, but then maybe help her try and catch up with her other patients other patients that, now it's been an hour that she's been away from them, she or he, sorry, again with this, has been away from them, to then be able to help figure out what's, do you have any other patients? Do you need a hand? Do you want to boost your patients? Do you want to change them? Do you need a hand doing a quick set of vitals on everybody because we've kind of been tied up with this? How else can I assist you in this moment to get you to a place where you're more comfortable and give you the opportunity to learn, but then also give you the support to then support your patients that you still have, that, this patient may or may not be whisked up to the ICU and they're out of your care. But let's also focus on the patients who are kind of left in the background, because heaven knows that there's something brewing there also that a senior nurse can help the new nurse figure out. So that was my pitch. It didn't go anywhere, of course, and nothing really ever happens until there's a critical incident. But the very Canadian perspective is prevent, prevent, prevent. So let's take the moment that all this education could be happening and take that as a critical moment to then upgrade that primary nurse, because then that primary nurse is still in that med surg environment, and they can then relay back, again, storytelling, and relay back to their peers, hey, I had this critical incident. You wouldn't believe this. This is what happened, A, B, C, D, E. This is what they did to fix said incident. You know, if you're ever wondering about a patient and you're not so sure, you can trust your gut. This is a whole thing that we can teach and explore. But then this is somebody else came to help me and supported me while we're also then catching up with my other patients. So what a wonderful way to then be able to support your peers and help them grow and share the knowledge in a very stressful scenario where that poor nurse, 9 times out of 10 is beyond overworked, exhausted, doesn't know what's going on, worries that they missed something. And now we can take that really critical event and turn it on its head to be a learning event and a non-punitive, hey, we're going to learn from this and I need you to take this information back to your peers so that everybody can learn. And then, something else happens some other time, you get another nurse. Well, now we're upgrading that nurse and it's just you're slowly upgrading. And especially on night shift, I'm straight nights. We don't have access to respiratory therapy. We don't have access to my manager or my educator or any other support services. Like it's just us. So what better way to then also make sure that night shift gets the support they need, because some of us are just in positions where we can't work anything other than nights for the moment. But let's not forget about the night shifters. We need to support them too.
It's such an important subject, Jen, and I think the fact that you've written a book about this and that you're speaking about it, and for me that puts it out there. And I think the more of us that are nurses that do that, the greater the reach. And my final question really for you is I want to ask you, how has your book been received by your colleagues and other nurses? What feedback have you had?
So the book is not technically out just yet. I'm hoping mid-November, but editing and all this is taking longer than anticipated. So we keep kind of pushing it back just a little bit. It's the universe's, last laugh at having me finally wait 2.5 to 3 years to finally get this thing out. Those who have read it, they're like, this reads like you. It's just you talking and it's you. It's a very informal, I'm understanding what you're talking about with the intuition piece and the science piece, but then I'm also able to then put it right into these scenarios that you're talking about, which has been so lovely, because a lot of these scenarios, it's my trauma laid out on the page. That's, it's how it started, that's how it's finished. And the joke is, if I ever need a new therapist, I just give them the book and be like, so this is volume 1 of why I am the way that I am. We'll save thousands of dollars. You can just read. Here you go. But otherwise, so at this conference in Vegas, there was a health system in the US that came up and we were talking, and they saw the book and they said, oh, intuition. She's like, oh, I just put out a pathway for intuition and nursing. I'm like, pardon me? Like a clinical pathway? I will hit you up and read about that later. She goes, yeah. And we got talking about Nursing Week and the joke of Nursing Week gifts and how,
Oh, don't get me started on
the nurses talk. So if you don't have a good gift, the nurses talk. And so she goes, well, how much is your book? I said, oh, $15.99 Canadian and American. Cause I'm like, you know what, it's going to be the same Canadian as American. I'll take the hit for the exchange rate. I don't care. It'll be nice to have them at the same rate. And she goes, well, would we be able to get it down to $10 a book if I bought a bunch of them? I'm like, yeah, probably, not a big deal. She goes, yeah, we'll take 6,000 for nurses. And I'm like, I'm sorry, pardon? And she goes, oh yeah, we'll have it for Nurses Week. We'll put it out. Maybe we'll bring you down to talk at Nurses Week. I'm like, yeah, I think we could do that. $10 a book, absolutely, for 6,000 copies. I'm pretty sure we can do $10 a book American. And then the Canadian, I'm like, no, we're all winning. We are all winning here. And this is somebody who hasn't read the book, but is just very much also invested in the idea of us talking about intuition. And so I still haven't processed. That was just last week. So I'm still overwhelmed and not sure what to do with myself. But
that's fabulous though, Jen, because that's validating, isn't it, for you, that there's actually, this is a really important subject. And I think, sometimes we doubt that. I can relate a little bit because I'm also writing, but mine's not as further down the road as yours, and mine is all about leadership, and it's really taking all of my knowledge and experience and writing it in a practical how-to format. And there's times when I think I sometimes think, is it too basic? And then I have a really good friend
Mhm.
who's my critical reader, and she says, you always have to remember people don't know what you know. And it's to make it, to write it in a way that people can take it and think, okay. And I think that's, to me, what your book does very well, is take all of that. And I know it was a trauma response. And sometimes those things are the things that prompt us to write and talk about, those experiences. And part of my purpose for having people on the podcast is to talk about these things, because I want other nurses to listen and think, oh, it's not just me. Someone else has gone through this. Someone else has felt this way. And look how they've used that experience for a greater good and a positive impact on nursing. And I think that, to me, is what you're doing with your book, taking all of that at the time was a challenging, traumatic situation. And I think that's also, we lived through the horrors of COVID, and I think really perhaps people didn't understand just the legacy of that for nursing and what that did to nurses, because of just how much the profession was exposed to and how challenging it was, the enormity of that and the level of that. And I think, we can't forget that. There's some important lessons. COVID was a horrible time, but there's important learnings. And this is one of the ways in which we make sure that those learnings remain, if you like. So I'm really thrilled to have had the opportunity, Jenn, to talk with you today and to learn more about your book. And, please let me know when your book is published, and I will share the link in this podcast episode, because I think it's such an important read for nurses. And well done to you for writing the book, because I know that's not easy either.
It was one of those things where it poured out. Like I don't remember writing the majority of it. It was just, a sleep deprived haze of, being overwhelmed and just it felt good to get it out. So I just continued to write. I got up really, really early. I stayed up really, really late. And that's all I remember. And so going back and going into these stories again and again and again, because most of them are traumatic, and it took, most of them are, our 2-minute little stories that we tell each other when things happen, and to then sit back and really sit in it and get back into that headspace and relive a lot of it. It took a lot of times going in and out, because I was heavily triggered and overwhelmed. I said, no, I can't do anymore. Would pop out, give it a couple of days to a week, go back into that story, work on a different one. And it's not easy.
No.
But there are life lessons. I'm still really debating burning the first copy just to say this is a release of it all, because it was so heavy. My work wife says that she'll kill me if I do that to the first copy. So I'm debating, but at the same time, like, it is very much, if it helps one person, if one person feels less alone, if one person feels more supported, if one person learns to trust their gut, it was all worth it, just to get it out there. And, the worry about, such a topic and my license and stories and my license and continuing to kind of have that fear, I think sometimes prevents us from telling the stories that need to be told. We all understand, personal health information and all this other things, but this is a way to learn, and this is a really, really good way to learn.
Yeah. And I think it's an important mechanism, because there's nurses, we're good storytellers, actually. We are.
Ask any of us, because, we've all got stories. We can't work with people and not come away with stories,
No,
good,
absolutely
bad,
not.
otherwise.
Yeah.
So, just don't ask us our most traumatic, for the love of everything. To have somebody at 3 a.m. out of nowhere go like, what's your most traumatic story? And I'm like, pardon me? Do I want you to also go to therapy, or do I just want you to kind of have a laugh? And that's where I'm going. I'm like, I don't know. What do you want from me?
I think just an observation, something that strikes me very much about your book, Jen, is, sometimes we think we need to be doing something different with the words, but I think because they're written in a way that is relatable and speak to nurses, that's important, because sometimes we dilute that a bit and then it doesn't resonate in the same way. Maybe there are other books to follow this one, they're obviously seeing something in that that's important, and not to lose sight of that.
Yeah.
That's just one of my observations.
The book industry is starting to figure it out.
Yeah.
So when I applied to publishers, they all were saying like, "Oh, what's your base and who are you trying to reach?" And when I said nurses, they're like, "Oh, it's so niche." And I'm like, in the United States alone, there's 5 million active nurses, let alone nursing students, let alone people looking to read the stories of nurses, let alone those who have retired. And I actually know 2 nurses from the Gritty Nurse podcast who actually live in town with me, and their book, The Wisdom of Nurses, went to a #1 New York Times bestseller. And Sarah was telling me, she's like, "Oh, the company doesn't really know how to market to nurses." They said they're market as it is to physicians. And then she goes, no, we had to correct that because we are a whole different beast.
Yeah, it's so true that actually you've just got to have a quick look at what's out there. And there's lots of academic theory-based books, as you would imagine, but there's not very many books that are saying it as it is. And you're absolutely right. I've had people say that to me, it's a really defined niche, because I work with nurse managers. But I know from experience and being a leader that that's such an important role for many, many reasons.
And they don't teach that in nursing school either.
No, they don't. They absolutely don't. Yeah, well, that's a whole nother podcast episode. But it's been a pleasure, Jen, really, today to interview you. And I'm very grateful for your time and coming and talking about your book. And I really, really wish you every success with this, because it's an important topic. It needs to be out there and it needs to be read, more so for nurses to actually realize, hey, it's not just me. That's important wherever you are in the world, because this is not just, as we know, it's not just a Canadian or Australian or UK. This is a global problem.
It's
so I
everywhere.
really value your time today. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute joy, honestly.
Thank you.